Hi everybody, Amy Letke here with Integrity HR. Thanks for joining us today to talk about talent acquisition in a post-pandemic world. With me today is DeDe Kelley, our very own Talent Acquisition Director. Welcome, DeDe.
Hi, thanks. So glad to be here.
So glad you are here. Today we're going to reveal some very specific techniques to help you remain competitive in the crazy times that we're in. And DeDe's going to help us walk through best practices that you can implement right away. So make sure you get out your piece of paper, your pencil, sharpen it up, get ready. We're going to give you some awesome tips on this webinar. So DeDe, secrets revealed. What kind of advice are we going to cover today on helping business owners remain competitive in this crazy time?
So I've got a few tips and tools today. So what I've done this for 25 years. And with the experience that I have and going through this pandemic, oh my gosh, it totally changed our world. It flipped it upside down. We had to sit back and look at what are the things that are important. We're going to talk about employer value proposition. It's going to be a big one that's important for us today. Revising your hiring process because you know the world has changed. Utilizing tools and assessments and making sure that we have the right tools and assessments. And we're going to focus too today a little bit on diversity and inclusion. I know it's a hot topic. It's a little more than you think it is, so we'll dig into that a little bit. And the importance of investing in your talent acquisition recruiting. It is so important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, DeDe, for that. So let's start off with that first point, the employer value proposition, or maybe it's employee value proposition. I think the employer's got to figure it out. The employee's got to say, yes, I want it. Something like that, right, DeDe?
Yes, you're
All right, let's fill our audience in on that.
So what does that even mean, right? And a lot of people maybe have heard that, but they don't know what it means. So what the EVP, as we'll call it, is, it's the set of benefits that you offer as an employer to your employee for, in return, their skills, their expertise, their experience, right? That's what they're bringing. What do they want? What do candidates want from their employer?
Yeah.
So here are some of the things they want. They want some flexibility. I think we know that. That's been a big hot topic. We want competitive benefits.
Yes.
That's really important. Career growth, which can mean a lot of different things for people. We'll dig into that. And then a sense of belonging in the company. Those are things that are most important.
Yeah, you know, it's really interesting. I think that whole benefit discussion is interesting because what one person may perceive of value may be different from somebody else. And that
Absolutely.
can be really tricky to try to figure all that out.
It can be very tricky sometimes to figure that out. So one of the things I like to talk about too is EVP and some examples of really good ones. So Google has a great employee or employer value proposition, employee value proposition, and so does Nike. So when you read those, what you want your EVP to say is who we are, what we offer, what we're going to give you when you come to our family or you come to our team when you join us. And when you have that really strong EVP, you have to do what you say. And so that's an important piece of it too. So when you write that up and you get that out there, make sure you're following through. That's the important piece of it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, DeDe. Great advice and great examples from clearly big companies that are leading the pack.
Yeah.
Super. Well, let's take a look at our hiring process. You know, this is always something that's up for discussion. And clearly, when we talk with our clients about the hiring process, there's always a lot of moving parts with that. So, DeDe, let's talk about what's important when we're looking at our hiring process and maybe how we decide if we need to revise it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I think you and I were talking about this the other day, having a process.
Yes.
So first, have a process. Follow that process, right? You want to simplify your hiring process. And I don't mean make it easy on a candidate necessarily. What I mean is simplify the process so that we can understand it. A candidate knows exactly where they sit. Your team members know exactly what they're doing and follow the process. So that's going to be most important. Have a process, follow it, right? Make it simple for everybody to engage in. Find out what's top of mind of your candidate. And I think a lot of times we think as a company, we're interviewing you, what I have to say is most important. And yes, it is. It's also important to know what they want, right?
Absolutely.
So you want to engage with your candidate and know what they want. You want to engage with candidates quickly. You want to engage with them frequently. You know, we have a tough market right now, so we have to make sure that we're staying in touch. You know, we hear this a lot of times that, you know, I had a recruiter I was working with and then they ghosted me. They stopped talking to me. It's the worst, right? So you want to make sure you're engaging and staying in contact. You want to offer virtual interviews. I think we know this.
Yes. Yes.
We know this by this point, but you do want to offer that as an option because people are taking off work typically when they're interviewing for a job. So you want to make it convenient for them. And then require less interviews, and by that I mean less times they're stepping foot in your office. So if you want them to interview with 6 people, that's fine, but try to do it in a day, right? We want to be cognizant of their time. So those are some of the steps that are important.
I have a question for you about that, DeDe. What about the timing on these interviews? Tell us a little bit about when an employer has a candidate that's a really good fit and you've got this process for interviews, you've kind of got that figured out. How much time are we seeing that we have in order to, get somebody on board from the beginning of the interview process until they're hired? What would be a best practice that you'd recommend to our audience here?
So it's going to depend on the level of the candidate, what level you're bringing them in at. A higher level candidate, we can probably take a little bit more time. There's going to be a little more decision making in it. But you do want to keep it as short as you can. So as far as giving an answer, you want to give an answer to them on what next steps are within 24 hours. They were in, we need to make a decision. If it's just for the next step, like you'll have another interview. The interview could be a few days from now, that's fine, but you want to keep the communication time short and succinct. So from beginning to end of an interview process, if we can get somebody through the process in a couple of weeks, that would be ideal. It's a hot market, we all hear that too. So we've got to be cognizant of that. We don't want to lose top talent when we find it.
Yep. Great advice, DeDe. Thank you so much for that. So a couple of things we might be thinking about in terms of best practices is looking at how we're screening candidates. So would you mind kind of speaking to that as far as what you're seeing working now and what kind of tips you'd have for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So we utilize a lot of tools and screening tools during our process. It's part of our practice here. It's what we do. We want to make sure we're getting not only the right, skill set fit, and remember we can teach some of that. So we want to make sure that we get that skill set. We want to make sure it's a good culture add and culture fit. That's what's important, right? So that's part of what's important to today's candidate. And they want to feel included, right? So we use some screening tools. So those can be everything from, we happen to utilize the DISC assessment. We have another assessment called a PXT that we utilize, which is fabulous. We do emotional intelligence, and we have skills testing. So these are the tools that you want to utilize in the process to help us make sure we're making the best decision.
Right. I think it's interesting sometimes determining whether a candidate actually has the skills and can demonstrate the skills as compared to what they have on their resume. You're trying to kind of close that gap on what the perception is of the candidate and what the reality is. Right?
Yeah, they said trust and verified, right? Like, I trust what you're saying, but let me verify you can do that.
Right. And I think we've really maximized the opportunity to kind of verify these with these skills tests. And how many do we have? Like, what, 1,500 of those available?
Oh, yeah. I think that's what it is for that. It's a ridiculous amount. Yeah.
Right. So the more technical the position, the more you want to maybe find a baseline of, what's the knowledge and the expertise that someone has. So DeDe's really great at figuring out how to do that and move that process along. So if you're not validating some skills on some of these positions that you're hiring for, you might want to reach out to us and we can give you some examples and some things you might want to consider putting into your process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, terrific. So thinking about the use of assessments versus not using them, can you maybe speak for a moment about, using a process is important. Having assessments is kind of like, looking at an iceberg, right? What we see in an interview is that piece of the iceberg that's above the water. It's just the tip of the iceberg. What we really want to get to in terms of a candidate, if we relate them to being an iceberg, is what's below the water, right? What's that big chunk of the iceberg that lies below the water that we don't always get to see? And that's where these assessments can come in and help us with our decision making. Can you maybe share a little case study with us about, a client that didn't use assessments and kind of what was the opportunity lost there as far as compared to someone who does use those? What are the opportunities that get gained by that, DeDe?
Yeah, absolutely. We have actually a client that I'm currently working with who came to us and said, we've really been struggling with hiring. We're having a hard time with talent acquisition. We can't get the right person in. I've offered 2 candidates and they didn't work out. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong. And I was like, I don't know you're doing anything wrong. So let's start there, right?
Okay.
But let's see how we can help. So what are some things that we can do? We introduced assessments into the process. I go, why don't we try this? Let's do this and see. I think part of what they were struggling with was they weren't finding the right culture fit. You can like somebody, and when you interview them, you really like them. Doesn't mean you should hire them, right? So we want to make sure that we have that right culture fit. So we introduced the PXT, and we're like, let's start here. This is a validated process that we can use, hiring tool that we can use. So let's start here. And we introduced it into their process with their candidates. And we got a candidate across the finish line. They hired someone, and so far, it's been a really great fit. And for them, they thought the skill set, we added that one as well. We did some skill testing to make sure they had that. We utilized the PXT, and we got some great interview questions to follow up from that PXT, which is part of the benefit of that. They were able to dig in a little bit deeper in their interview, and it made the difference for them. It really made the difference. And is this the right fit, right? Is this the right candidate?
Great. I know you've got stories like that you can tell us all day long. But thank you for sharing that. So again, this is an important piece. Now, moving on to a big topic that we've been hearing about, diversity and inclusion. So what does that mean as a best practice for our audience today, DeDe?
You know, I think, and I like talking about this, this is the area that I like digging into, because I think today it's DE&I a lot of times, or D&I, diversity, equity, inclusion, diversity and inclusion. And we automatically go to things like race, religion, you know, all of that's where we go with diversity. Yes, absolutely. That's part of it. And that's what we need to think of. We also need to think of diversity of thought. So a lot of times, again, I'll go to a former client actually, and they hired people, they wanted them to be just like them. And I was like, that's great. But then who's going to challenge you? Right. You know, if we all think the same, who's going to challenge anybody? So you want that diversity of thought around your table too. So when we're sitting here having meetings, if we all say, oh my gosh, this is the best idea ever. Yes, it is. But is it? So you want someone to push back and say, I don't know, is it? You know, let's have this conversation. So that's another piece of it when you think about that. You know, we think about race, religion, all of those things as diversity. Absolutely. I want to see that around your table too. Everyone needs to have a voice. And then I also want to see around your table thought diversity. I think that's what's important. We don't always talk about that.
Right. Interestingly enough, so, you know, we didn't even talk too much about your background, but I tell you what, this one has got a really interesting educational set, which makes her such a super recruiter and such a great leader. And DeDe, can I just ask you to brag on yourself for just a moment about...
If I have to.
Yeah, please do. It's really impressive and interesting.
Thanks.
So
thank you.
Maybe just share with our audience a little bit
Yeah,
about
I'd love
that.
to. So I started my career out, have a business degree and undergrad in business, and have owned my own businesses, very entrepreneurial in spirit. But what I realized, I sat back and looked at my career, and I'm like, what do I love the most about what I do? And it's people. I've always loved working with people. No matter what role I've sat in, I have ended up being the person that either is a talent acquisition director, talent acquisition manager, doing recruiting, working with people. That became my passion. So I went back to school and I got a master's degree in social work, which then means I am a licensed mental health therapist. And I love having that. That opened my mind, and it got me diversity of thought, and it really rounded out my business practice. It helped, right? And it helps in working with people. So I love that I have that hard business knowledge and understanding, and then I have this people side of me, because I say this all the time. When you remove business, when we take these walls down, who's standing there? It's the people, right? That's what runs this business, and that's what runs everything. So we've got to get to know people.
Absolutely. I think it's a very secret weapon that you bring to the table, DeDe, and love to watch you in action. So thanks for sharing a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah.
Now we're going to kind of start winding this down. Let's talk about talent acquisition and how we invest in this recruiting process. DeDe, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so talent acquisition is so important, so many levels. And I think a lot of people equate talent acquisition with human resources. Yes, it is it's under the umbrella, but it's very separate.
Sure.
Yeah. So talent acquisition and recruiting. Recruiting is the active process of bringing people in. Talent acquisition is looking at the big picture and do we have the right people on the team? Where do we need to add? What do we need to do? They're the first look at your company. So when you have a talent acquisition team, whether you have it internally or you have it externally and you use us for that, we're going to be that first impression, because that's what matters, right? We're that first impression with the candidate. We're setting the tone for what the business is. We have to know what that EVP is. We live it and breathe it, right? That is so important, the EVP we talked about earlier. So you got to make sure you have a strong talent acquisition team, that you have good people giving out your message and what you want that to look like.
Perfect. Great. We also have a mention here on our slide about an applicant tracking system, and that's really kind of a tool that is a secret weapon for a lot of businesses, right? So
Yeah.
can you explain to the audience a little bit about what this is and why it might be important if people don't have something formal on their website to help people apply for openings?
Absolutely. So an applicant tracking system is a software program that's going to house all of your candidates. Basically, that's what it's for. It's for candidate flow. It's for keeping them in there. Why is it important? Well, if we're hiring someone and we don't have an applicant tracking system, say we have this all on paper on my desk, and I leave.
Yeah.
Now what? I don't know what DeDe was doing. I don't know where these people are. So it's so important that you have it housed somewhere. It's safe for the company. It protects you. It has all of your information in there. These are your candidates. And let's say you are that company that you grow your people. You teach them, you grow them, you promote them throughout the company. So Amy, we hired you. We love you. We're going to make you CEO of the company. So we're moving you up. We have to backfill your position.
Mm-hmm.
I can go back into my applicant tracking system from when I hired you and say, look at all these people that applied for this position. I want to talk to them and see if maybe they're still interested.
Right.
And you can reach out. It gives you historical data. It allows you to have your pipeline built, your bench built for when you do need to hire more people.
Mm-hmm.
It's an important tool. It needs to just be common practice, really. You have to have that.
But sometimes people just don't know what they don't know. So if you need some help getting some free postings on Indeed, sometimes these tools can really pay for themselves in about 30 days. So it's really beneficial to help you get that talent in. We can tell you more about it if you're interested. And if you already are using one, we can help you optimize that too.
Yes, absolutely.
Terrific. All right, DeDe. Well, I'm so glad that you joined me this morning. And we are excited to share information with all of you in our audience. Thanks so much for being with us today. If we can help you in any way here at Integrity HR, it would be our honor and pleasure. So reach out to us and let us talk to you about your talent acquisition strategy, your EVP, or any of the other things DeDe had shared today. DeDe, thanks so much for being with me and appreciate your time, and we appreciate yours too. Hope to see you on another webinar very soon.